3 years ago, I made a video called The Roman Emperor's Tier List. To be honest, it was a pretty bad video with some pretty terrible takes, so with the release of this new edition of my Roman Emperor's Tier List, I did more research, and I'm going to try to be more careful and more unbiased with my rankings. If we're gonna be honest here, there's no fully intellectually consistent way to do this sort of ranking, but we're gonna try. So my guiding question for this ranking is, did this emperor leave the empire better than they found it? So to analyze how Roman emperors affected the state of the Roman polity, I want to talk about the two most important roles that Roman emperors had to play. On one hand, Roman emperors were military leaders, and on the other hand, they were administrators. Now, some Roman emperors also embarked on various attempts to reform, reshape the political, economic structure of the empire. Now, ultimately, all emperors will be judged by how their military and political actions help maintain the political authority and power of the Roman imperial government. By the way, I should explain this category that I've added here called the irrelevant category. I consider an emperor to be irrelevant if, as an individual, they exercise very little control over political affairs during their reigns, or if their reigns were too short to have any impact on the course of politics. Also, I'm not going to be judging emperors by their extracurricular actions, that is, their personal lives or cultural pursuits, except in cases where those things interfere with their political administration or military policy. Additionally, it is difficult, to say the least, to rank emperors who enjoyed peaceful reigns, long peaceful reigns, alongside emperors whose entire careers were devoted to fighting civil wars. But I will try nonetheless. I'll also say that I think it's very unfair to compare emperors who reigned over peaceful and prosperous times to emperors who reigned during times of trouble. Emperors who reigned during those times of crisis and managed to achieve great things should get even more credit. So, without further ado, let's get started with our first guy here, the Emperor Augustus. Now, in my opinion, he's an easy S tier. I mean, he made the blueprint for Roman emperors after him. Under his reign, Rome conquered more land than under any other emperor. Augustus also ensured a transition from a brutal period of civil wars and political instability to a period of harmonious peace throughout the Mediterranean world. Okay, so next we have Tiberius. Tiberius, I think the impression we get is that he didn't necessarily want to be emperor, or at least wasn't too enthusiastic about it, which is evidenced by the fact that Augustus went through several heirs before picking Tiberius eventually. Now, Tiberius actually starts off pretty strong. He's a pretty good emperor at first, but in his later years, he becomes more reclusive. He kind of leaves public life and delegates the duties of the imperial office to his various subordinates, who often were very, very corrupt and not very trustworthy. So, for example, he gives authority to his Praetorian prefect, a guy named Sejanus, very notoriously corrupt. So I think Tiberius has to get a C tier here. It was going well at first, but then he kind of lost a handle on things toward the end because of his apathy. Okay, next we have, oh boy, I love this guy. We have Gaius. You probably know him as Caligula. He was mentioned in a Smith song, by the way. But regardless, he's going to have to be in F tier, easy F tier. He actually spent almost the entire treasury on public games and welfare within just 4 years. You know, he probably wasn't as insane as the stories say, but he was most likely an awful emperor, which is probably why he was assassinated just 4 years into his reign. Okay, we have Claudius next. Claudius is picked by the Senate after Gaius is assassinated, and he actually does very well. I'm going to give him a high B tier. He was an active administrator. He was an active lawyer as well, presiding over legal cases. He built infrastructure across the empire. He expanded the imperial bureaucracy. He initiated the conquest of Britain, and he officially annexed several provinces into the empire. So, you know, for a guy who was always seen as the weakling, the side character, the nerd, that's not too bad of a resume. Next, we have Nero. He is the last Julio-Claudian emperor. And, in the past, I was more sympathetic to Nero, but I think I'm going to have to put him in E tier. His irresponsible fiscal policy was a result of him spending a lot of money on games and public works to make himself popular with the people. In general, he was very hands-off with most matters pertaining to the state. He was more concerned with his artistic pursuits. So yeah, all things considered, even without talking about his interpersonal crimes like killing his mom, I don't think we can say that Nero was a particularly effective emperor. Right, so after Nero's death, it's the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. There's no clear heir, and so we have what's called the Year of the Four Emperors, during which a bunch of usurpers fight it out to see who will win the office of Roman Emperor. 3 of them are going straight to the irrelevant tier because they never managed to actually consolidate their power, let alone do anything as emperor before, dying, getting killed, losing a battle, something like that. And so this is, I guess, a good example of why this irrelevant tier exists. It would not really be that easy to rank any of these guys alongside the emperors we've already ranked, because they just didn't have any time to do anything. So the guy that comes out of the Year of the Four Emperors is a guy named Vespasian. He has a pretty uneventful reign, I want to say, but a pretty good reign overall. He presided over a period of prosperity, and he didn't mess it up. There's something to be said about that. Similar things I think I could say about his son, Titus. In fact, both of them, I think, reached their peak of political achievement before they became emperors. They both prosecuted a campaign against the Great Jewish Revolt in Palestine, brought back a lot of wealth from that, and used it to fund the construction of the Colosseum, which I would say was their crowning achievement as emperors. But yeah, both of them were very decent emperors, not super revolutionary or anything, but they didn't rock the boat too much during a time when the empire was doing fantastic, so I think that earns them both a B tier. Now, the next guy here, Domitian, he is also Vespasian's son, Titus's younger brother. Titus becomes emperor first after Vespasian dies, but then Titus dies unexpectedly just 2 years into his reign, and so Domitian rises to the throne. Now, he actually is going to get an A tier from me, because like Vespasian and Titus, he presided over a period of prosperity. But unlike them, Domitian was a very active administrator and general. He was always moving around from province to province, diagnosing problems, figuring out what needed to be done. He built up a very good relationship with the army, everyone from the generals to the common soldiers. They loved Domitian. It is true that Domitian made a lot of political enemies because his reign kind of marks the beginning of the political marginalization of the Senate. Domitian is off in the provinces making policy by himself. Previous emperors, Vespasian, Titus included, as well as a lot of the Julio-Claudians, they stay in Rome, they stay in Italy, they work closely with the Senate, and Domitian refuses to do this. He's almost arrogant. He doesn't believe in this notion of senatorial privileges, or that this elite class that has ruled the empire effectively since the days of the Republic should still have this sort of power. And the senators did not like Domitian for this, which is why he eventually gets assassinated, and then his historical reputation gets smeared. But he was a very good administrator, and he worked actively to make sure that the empire was flourishing and doing well. And the economy was doing well during his time. Everything was pretty good during Domitian's time. It's undeniable. So I think he very much earns his A tier placement here. Next, we have so-called 5 good emperors, starting off with Nerva. Now, I think it's undeniable that Nerva achieved something great politically, and that was ensuring a peaceful transition of power from himself to his successor, Trajan. Now, this was not by any means a guarantee, right? Like, the last time in Roman history that a dynasty had fallen, that the last emperor of a dynasty had died violently, that was Nero. And in the aftermath of his death, we saw a civil war. So when Domitian died, when the Flavians fell, there was certainly this risk. There was certainly this possibility that Rome could see more civil wars. And Nerva's sound leadership during this unstable time definitely helped keep Rome from that violent outcome, which certainly is an accomplishment. I don't think too highly of his financial policies, because I think he spent a little bit too liberally on paying off his allies, paying off the people who had got him to where he was, and he put some strain on the imperial finances as a result of this. Also, he just didn't have the opportunity or really the mandate to make significant change or significant policy decisions, because he was ultimately just meant to be a transition figure between Domitian and Trajan, which is what he was, and he served with distinction in that role. So yeah, I'll give him a C tier. He was okay. Definitely achieved one great thing. The rest of his policy, kind of eh. So yeah, C tier I think is reasonable. Anyway, next we have Trajan. Trajan is going easy S tier. One of Rome's greatest conquerors and generals ever. The province of Dacia, which he conquered, of course, was immensely lucrative and provided the Roman economy with precious metals until the mid-3rd century. And his Parthian campaigns also yielded a lot of wealth in the form of loot. Trajan used this wealth to give back to the citizens of Italy in the form of a welfare state, kind of. So under him, also Rome reaches its territorial peak. So one could argue, I guess, that Rome reached its greatest heights during the reign of Trajan. Certainly under Trajan, the Roman army reaches its peak as a conquering force. Next, we have Hadrian. Now, Hadrian is also going to go in the S tier. He'll always be remembered as a lover of Greek culture, but he was also the perfect man for consolidating the fruits of empire, of that imperial project that his predecessor Trajan had brought to its apex. Now, Hadrian's big policy move he does immediately after rising to the throne is withdrawing from Mesopotamia. I've actually seen historians argue that this wasn't Hadrian's decision, that it was kind of forced upon the Romans by financial considerations, that they had to withdraw from Mesopotamia and Armenia. But in either case, I think Hadrian recognized a policy imperative of the time, which is that the Roman Empire was big enough, and future conquests, trying to hold on to future conquests, was going to be way too expensive and not going to be worth it in the long run. So Hadrian realized this, and he shifted Roman policy from one of expansion to one of consolidation, defense. Hadrian was very much like Domitian, in that he moved around all over the place. He went to every province and diagnosed problems himself and enacted solutions. Hadrian's Wall and other defensive projects were very beneficial to the empire's long-term survival and economic prosperity. So yeah, I think Hadrian definitely gets an S tier for setting the tone for centuries of future Roman military and political policy. Next, we have Antoninus. Antoninus is going to go in A tier because despite not doing that much, he never once leaves Italy during his 21-year reign. He did have the fortune to rule during the period of greatest prosperity and stability in Roman history, and he didn't mess it up, so that's enough to land him in A tier, I think. Next, we have Marcus Aurelius. And Marcus Aurelius is also going to get an A tier. Famously, the philosopher emperor, the Stoic emperor. Additionally, he was a capable general. He led Rome through the Marcomannic Wars, and he was also a capable administrator. He ensured that things ran smoothly during the Antonine Plague, which was devastating. I find it interesting that Marcus Aurelius, despite being raised during a time of prosperity, and being raised in great luxury and great wealth and great privilege, that he was able to become a soldier emperor and perform his duties well during this time of crisis. Next, we have Marcus Aurelius's brother, Lucius Verus, who reigns jointly with Marcus for the first few years of his reign. Now, Lucius Verus doesn't actually do all that much. He's not the most active emperor, exactly. He's also not the most successful, but he doesn't, commit any major horrible blunders. And it was okay that he wasn't the most active or useful emperor because his brother was there. His brother was guiding the ship of state very well, so he wasn't too necessary. So yeah, I think he can just have a C tier. He can just be in C tier somewhere. That's fine. Next, we have Marcus Aurelius' son, Commodus, very infamous, portrayed in Gladiator, of course. He's also getting an easy F tier. I'm gonna put him above Caligula actually, but he's still an easy F tier. Given how much stuff is written about him being insane, I think he was probably at least kind of insane. He also delegated all of his administrative duties to his ministers, the same way that Tiberius did, which predictably led to similar results. You know, very, very corrupt people just like embezzling money and like doing corrupt people things. Yeah, the administration was not in a great state under Commodus. However you spin it, his reign was not great, especially after his megalomaniacal turn at the end. Yeah, I think F tier is a good place for him. Okay, so Commodus dies. Again, we have the fall of a dynasty. This is the moment when civil war breaks out once again, and we have the year of the 5 emperors. So the first guy is Pertinax, chosen by the Senate to be emperor. He does not last long. Neither does Didius Julianus, who actually bought the imperial office from the Praetorian Guard after they auctioned it off after killing Pertinax. So yeah, at this point, the imperial office is being sold by the Praetorian Guard, and this rich guy was dumb enough to buy it. That didn't end well for him. The 2 other emperors from the year of the 5 emperors are not here because they are considered usurpers, I suppose. But the 5th guy, a guy named Septimius Severus, is pretty historically important, so we're going to have to rank him. And I'm actually going to put him in the D tier here. I'll give him a high D tier. Severus was a warrior emperor. He was a general. He was a hard-headed military dictator in some readings. He prioritized the military perhaps a bit too much. One of the main things he does is raise the pay of the soldiers, and this made it very difficult for the Roman economy to keep paying for the army. I will say that an increase in military spending in general was probably very necessary because Rome was experiencing great security threats at the time. But I think we'll see later that the downstream impact of Severus doing this, as well as embarking on several military campaigns that maybe he didn't need to or were maybe needlessly expensive, they sow the seeds for future disaster. So yeah, we see all that coming from Severus's reign, which is why I think I have to put him in the D tier. So after Severus dies, he hands power to his 2 sons, Caracalla and Geta. Caracalla I'm going to put right next to him because I think Caracalla was very similar to Severus as far as policy and mindset. Caracalla and Severus both were very competent generals, and they both liked military life a lot. They both enjoyed leading armies, so Caracalla's always around campaigning. Caracalla, I think, also spends a little too much on the military in the form of possibly unnecessary military campaigns, and Caracalla, like his father, also raises the pay of the soldiers, which continues to cause a problem because, yes, this makes the army more and more expensive, and it's easy to raise the pay of the soldiers to make them happy for a while, but what happens when they ask for more? And what happens if you need to cut costs? You can't decrease their pay, otherwise they might kill you. This is something that will be a big problem for the future emperors of Rome. Anyway, we have Geta here, who was Caracalla's brother. He's irrelevant because he only reigned for like less than a year before Caracalla, the ruthless political actor that he was, had his brother killed. So yeah, Geta never got the chance to do anything. Caracalla also meets a violent end, replaced by a guy named Macrinus, who is also irrelevant because he didn't get to do much. He only reigned for about a year. And then comes to power a dynasty from the city of Emesa, led by a lot of powerful women, like a family of powerful women. They come to power in Rome, and they put on the throne a 14-year-old named Elagabalus, who is going to get an E tier from me. Now, Elagabalus, I think, was just a puppet, ultimately, put on the throne by his family, and he never did much himself. So I guess you could say he wasn't a great emperor, but he was just 14 upon ascending to the throne, and he also was not making the political decisions, so I find it a little difficult to rank him. He also possibly had gender dysphoria, and was probably having a lot of kinky sex, but I don't think any of that matters. It is probably undeniable that Elagabalus was not a very effective emperor. He was also not popular at all. When he is overthrown, the Roman crowds, they tear his body into pieces. And throw him into the Tiber. So yeah, not a very well-liked emperor, um, and also probably not a very good emperor, but certainly a very interesting emperor. So yeah, learn more about Elagabalus if you have the time. Absolutely fascinating stuff. Next, we have Alexander Severus. Now, Severus is in a similar situation to Elagabalus. Severus is also very young when he's on the throne, and he's also mostly a puppet of his family. Toward the end of his reign, he starts exercising a little bit more, independent political action. He starts leading some campaigns, but by and large, I think Severus's reign can be described as middling. He didn't do all that much, mostly because he was constrained by political realities and his family the whole time. And when he did act on his own, I think the actions were admirable. They just didn't turn out well. What got him killed was he tried to bribe a tribe of Germans because he didn't want to fight them for whatever reason. It's not necessarily clear why he tried this, but the army was not a fan of this, and so they had him overthrown in a coup. But yeah, I think Alex Severus was, holding it together mostly when he was capable of independent political action. So I'll put him in a C tier. Not great, not terrible. Right, so the guy who is leading this coup against Severus is a guy named Maximinus Thrax. Now, he's an interesting guy. He's a soldier, of course, and he was also 7 feet tall, or maybe not 7 feet tall, but very tall for his time. So, yeah, very imposing figure. And he comes to power at the head of this military coup, and he led campaigns against Germans, having some success with this, but he shortly died in the midst of some political strife in what's called the Year of the Six Emperors. So I'm going to put him in the high C tier because he did lose a civil war, but he did win a victory against the enemies of the empire. Anyway, these guys are irrelevant. Gordian the First, Gordian the Second, Pupienus, Balbinus, and Gordian the Third, all irrelevant. I'll explain why. So Gordian the First, Gordian the Second, father and son. Gordian the Third is a grandson. These two died after 22 days on the throne because they lost a battle. Pupienus and Balbinus also only reigned for a brief period of time before they die as well. These guys don't do much. Gordian the Third is a child. Gordian the Third was a child at the time of this, and so he never exercised any independent political action either before dying just 6 years into his reign. So even though reigning for 6 years, he didn't do much. Yeah, safely, all these guys can be said to be irrelevant, I would say. Here we have Philip the Arab. So Philip the Arab is also interesting. He waged a bunch of relatively inconclusive military campaigns. But the most significant thing that happens during his reign is the 1,000-year anniversary of the city of Rome. Rome celebrates its millennium, and there are a lot of festivals, games, and Philip gets credit for all of that because he just happened to be the guy sitting on the throne when that happened. So yeah, Philip, I don't know, generally an okay emperor. I wouldn't say it was too bad, wouldn't say it was too great. He can be in the C tier. Next is a guy, Decius. So Decius does two important things, both of which are not that great. One is he heightens the persecution of Christians, which was kind of dormant or informal or not too intense for a while. Decius really cracks down on the enforcement of the imperial cult, which the Christians refuse to worship, and so a lot of Christians end up dying under Decius and after. This is not really a great thing. Religious persecution is not really a great thing. Anyway, Decius also leads Rome into its greatest military disaster in a long time at the Battle of Abritus. He and his son, Hostilian, they lead the army into a swamp, into a trap set by the Goths, and the entire army is slaughtered. He dies on the battlefield. Very bad. So yeah, not great move there, Decius. He's going to have to get an E tier from me for that one. Anyway, next we have Trebonianus Gallus, who is irrelevant. Aemilian is irrelevant. And now we have Valerian. So Valerian takes power in the midst of some civil strife surrounding the death of Decius. Valerian kind of pulls things back together. He fights some campaigns against the Goths. They're inconclusive. And then he goes east to face the Persian threat, which is the new rising threat of this time. And he gets captured along with his entire army at the Battle of Edessa in 260. So yeah, not a great look for Valerian. He's going to have to go in the E tier for that one. Maybe he wasn't too bad, but he did blunder into Rome's worst military disaster in I don't know how long. So yeah, not great from Valerian there. His son, Gallienus, in the aftermath of this horrific battle, is sort of forced to pick up the pieces, and he does a very admirable job. He's pretty much running around addressing crisis after crisis. The work of Valerian and Decius in blundering Roman armies away in the face of Rome's enemies, the disasters that the Roman imperial government suffers during that decade, that really did not inspire confidence in the provinces. And so a lot of political figures in both the Eastern and Western empires are like, maybe the imperial government is not what we need right now. Maybe we need to break away and form more regionalized political units so we can better defend our territory. And so this is what ends up happening under Gallienus' reign. He has to deal with so many usurpers. He's always running around fighting a civil war, this or that civil war. And despite being a very competent general, a very competent administrator, he was not able to prevent the Gallic and Palmyrene empires from breaking away. But I think, honestly, he did an incredible job managing the empire during this period of crisis. Foreign invasions, usurpers. It was very clear at the time that major reform to the military and political system were necessary to keep the empire united and safe in some form, but Gallienus just never had the time or the latitude to conduct these reforms, and so he was never really able to succeed. But nevertheless, he did a good job, so he's going in the B tier. Like I said, if you perform during times of crisis, I think that you deserve a higher ranking. Next, we have Claudius Gothicus. Claudius Gothicus had a pretty short reign, but during his reign, he won a major victory over the Goths. So I think that gets him into at least the B tier, at least like a low B tier, definitely an above average emperor for that. Next, we have this guy, irrelevant. And then we have this guy, Aurelian. Many people are big Aurelian fans, so am I. He brought vast territories back under central control, and with his campaigns, he basically ensured the continued existence of a Roman imperial state, which was not a sure thing during his time. So yeah, without his military leadership at this stage, it's possible that we see the political fragmentation of the 400s taking place 2 centuries early. So in this sense, Aurelian is pretty decisive to Roman history. But I don't think that his short reign, combined with relatively little contribution to policy outside of military campaigning, I don't think that justifies him being in S tier. So I'm going to put him at the very top of A tier. Tacitus, irrelevant. Florianus, irrelevant. Now we have Probus. Probus was one of Rome's great warrior emperors. He won many victories against Rome's enemies. He shored up the frontier defenses, and he strengthened Rome's armies, but ultimately his reign was cut short by a coup led by this guy, Carus. Carus, also an interesting guy. He leads this coup, takes over the empire, and he delegates some authority to his relations. I'm not sure exactly what the relations are here, I don't remember, but anyway, Carinus and Numerian are his relations. They take care of other affairs while he is off in the east fighting the Persians, and he has a lot of success with the Persians. He wins a battle, very decisive. And while they're celebrating this victory, so the story goes, he got struck by lightning and then he died. So yeah, the Romans took that as an omen to leave Persia, and so they did. Carus is going to go in C tier, I think, high C tier, because again, he didn't do that much. He did win a civil war to become emperor, and then he did win a victory against Rome's enemies, but shortly after that, he died. So nah, I'll give him a C tier, high C tier. Next, we have this guy, Diocletian, one of the most famous Roman emperors. I think I might have overrated him a little bit in my previous video. It is true that many of his reforms just didn't work out or were silly ideas from the start, but it is undeniable that his reign and the political and military systems that he implemented defined the next centuries of Roman history, probably for the better. He secured the empire's frontiers, he helped make the state financially solvent, he reformed the military, better suited for the empire's defensive needs, and he proposed innovative solutions to the empire's political and economic problems. So, I think that earns him a good A tier placement right up here. Yeah, so one of the major innovations that Diocletian introduces is his political system, which is known to history as the Tetrarchy. His system was basically that there would be two senior emperors, or Augustus, and there would be two junior emperors, known as Caesar. He was one of the senior emperors, along with Maximian. Maximian's a very interesting guy. Very interesting guy. But I'm gonna have to give him like a low D tier for a couple reasons. So yeah, Maximian definitely had his moments, but ultimately his legacy will always be as the junior partner to Diocletian. He was always following Diocletian's lead. And after Diocletian, his career can only be described as embarrassing. So Diocletian famously retires peacefully. Maximian does the same. They retire together. But Maximian is tempted. Maximian was tempted by ambition. And so he came out of retirement and tried to be emperor again 3 times. And he failed all 3 times. Eventually, he was forced to commit suicide. So yeah, not a great career for Maximian. Didn't prove himself very much as an independent political actor. Next, we have Constantius I, also known as Constantius Chlorus. So Constantius Chlorus he was the junior emperor under Maximian. They both served in the west, while Diocletian and Galerius here served in the east. So Constantius Chlorus does a very good job as Maximian's junior emperor. He led several campaigns and won some victories, but he never got the chance to really show what he could do as an independent emperor. And so I'm going to give him a B tier here. I'm going to give him a low B tier. His counterpart, Galerius, is actually getting a low D tier because I don't think very highly of Galerius as an emperor. He performed well enough as a subordinate to Diocletian during the Tetrarchy, but once Galerius became the senior emperor, it seems like all of his political moves just caused more problems and inflamed existing political issues. So Galerius is at least partially responsible for the breakdown of the Tetrarchy system. Additionally, he diverted needless resources and brutality to a large persecution of Christians. Very unnecessary, very unhelpful. So yeah, low D tier for this guy. Valerius Severus, he was like a side character in the Tetrarchy story. He's going in the irrelevant tier. Next we have Maxentius. So Maxentius is very difficult to rank because, you know, his entire reign pretty much was him fighting civil wars. But as far as usurpers go, Maxentius was a pretty relentless and resilient usurper. He fought many wars. He took over the city of Rome before losing to Constantine. So, you know, as far as policy, we can't say much because he was pretty much always fighting either war of aggrandizement or a war of survival. But he did get pretty far in the game of Roman power politics. So just based on military performance, I'm going to put him like somewhere in the C tier, I guess. The C tier is getting pretty crowded. But yeah, he can go there. Next, we have Maximinus Daza. Maximinus Daza is another character in the Tetrarchy story, but he is most famous for losing a civil war. He was on the losing side of the civil wars, along with Maxentius, when they both lost to Constantine and Licinius. So yeah, Maximinus Daza is going to go in the D tier next to his fellow Tetrarchy civil war loser. Next, we have Licinius. Licinius was another guy who reigned for a decent period of time, but he was also usually fighting civil wars, and he was ultimately defined by his loss to Constantine in a civil war. We honestly don't know too much about what he was doing policy-wise, besides fighting military campaigns against the Empire's enemies. So yeah, I'm gonna put him next to Maxentius. I consider them similar characters. I think it is a bit sad that this is their legacy to be reduced to stepping stones in the path of Constantine the Great. But yeah, that's just their legacy, I guess. Anyway, we have Constantine here now, and he is actually going to go in the S tier. He's the last S tier emperor I have. This is a big turnaround from my prior opinion on him. Having read more about him, I understand now how decisive he was for Roman history. He was one of the great reformers of Roman times, or at least we should consider him as such. He reformed the military, continuing Diocletian's reforms to make the military more flexible and adaptable. He introduced the gold solidus coin, which helped address the imperial government's persistent fiscal issues and also provided European states with a reliable monetary base for the next 1,000 years. Constantine also saw a great opportunity in the rising Christian religion. He wanted to unite imperial political power with this universal religious authority that Christianity offered. And so, by convening the Council of Nicaea and helping to settle a doctrinal dispute, as well as establish a sort of canon, a sort of religious law almost for the entirety of Christianity, he attached the Roman emperor's political authority to the church, and thus gave the Roman emperors authority in the religious realm as well as the political. And this would be very, very important for the future centuries of Roman history. Perhaps most importantly, Constantine initiated the move to Constantinople. He founded the new imperial capital. As the Eastern Empire was richer and easier to defend from foreign invasions, putting the new imperial capital in the east and in perhaps one of the most defensible places ever, creating one of the most formidable fortress cities the world has ever seen. This secured the empire's survival during the centuries of economic decline and foreign invasion that followed. So yeah, Constantine, debatably S tier, but I would put in there. Okay, after Constantine dies, he passes power to his 3 sons. Oldest was Constantine, Constantine II. Constantine II is going straight in F tier because immediately after he came to the throne, pretty much, he decided to start a war with his younger brother Constans, and he lost, and he died. So yeah, somehow this guy got born as one of the most privileged people on Earth and threw it all away. That's pretty embarrassing. F tier. Next we have Constantius II. So after Constantine dies in the Civil War, Constantius becomes the senior emperor. He rules in the East. And I think fairly highly of his reign because I think he presided over, the most important part of the empire, and he presided over it pretty well. He kept the status quo in various military campaigns with the Persians, and he was just effectively managing the affairs of the empire for a while. So yeah, solid B tier for him. Right, so finally we have Constans. He's gonna get a D tier, I think. He was a pretty good emperor to start out with, but eventually he ended up losing the support of his army and getting overthrown, which I don't think that speaks very well to his effectiveness or charisma or anything, as an emperor. Anyway, we have now the last of the Constantinian dynasty, a guy named Julian, also known to history as Julian the Apostate because he was the last pagan emperor. He was the last emperor who made a serious attempt to bring Rome back to the days of paganism and reverse its trend toward Christianity. People, I think, overrate Julian a lot. I'm putting him, in high D tier. He's high D tier. Maybe, yeah, like high mid D tier. There's some allure to the idea of Julian as a philosopher emperor, in the mold of Marcus Aurelius, but let's be real, Julian was not Marcus Aurelius, even if he thought he was. He had a very short reign, during which he instituted widely unpopular religious reforms, and he died leading an expensive and disastrous campaign in Persia. Effectively, what happened is he led an army into Persia on his own initiative. He started a war of aggression against Persia, blundered into a strategic defeat, got his army surrounded, was killed, possibly by one of his soldiers for getting them into this situation, and then his successor, Jovian, this guy, had to negotiate and give away Roman territory to save the army. So yeah, to me, Julian's legacy is this idealistic guy who just was trying to, turn Rome back to a bygone age. Rome was not going to go back to the time of Hadrian and the classical thinkers. It was a different world, and I don't think Julian necessarily had the most practically minded approach to administration, nor to military matters, as you see when Julian led his army into the heartland of Persia and then got his army trapped. I think Julian ultimately was not very effective because he was just a bit too idealistic or a bit too ambitious in some ways. yeah, I think he's gonna have to go D tier here. Next we have Jovian. Jovian is irrelevant. He definitely did good by getting the Roman army out of Persia, but he didn't really get to do much else before he died. And succeeding him were Valentinian and Valens, brothers. Valentinian ruled in the west, and he was an incredibly effective ruler, one of the most active and effective warrior emperors that Rome ever had. He campaigned frequently across the Danube against the Goths, meeting a lot of success. He also addressed a major crisis in Britain during this time. He kept the island from falling to a foreign invasion. He also fought against Germanic tribes on the Rhine. And he did all of this with a lot of political, military, and diplomatic skill. So yeah, I'm going to put him in the A tier. Once again, you know, performing during times of trouble, gotta give him his credit. Next we have Valens. So Valens, I think, maybe gets a little bit unfairly maligned by history. Of course, Valens ultimately gets the blame for the Battle of Adrianople because he decided to attack without support from his co-emperor. But besides Adrianople, you know, he was a competent administrator, and he had proved himself a mostly competent general as well, so I don't think it's fair for one big mistake to define his whole legacy. Alright, next we have Gratian, who was Valens' co-emperor at the time of Adrianople. So, you know, previously it was Valentinian and Valens. But Gratian took over after Valentinian's death because Valentinian, this is the story at least, he got so mad that he started shouting and like a blood vessel burst or something and he died. So yeah, that's pretty funny. But Gratian replaced him. And Gratian, I don't think too highly of him because Gratian was largely ineffective in addressing the major crisis of their time, which was the Goths in the Balkans right after the disaster at Adrianople. Gratian is very ineffective throughout all of this, and he's generally ineffective throughout his reign at addressing crises that are popping up, which is part of why he eventually gets overthrown, just not providing very strong leadership during a time when that was pretty important for the empire. I'll give him like a high E tier here, I guess. Valentinian II, irrelevant. He was a puppet. Actually had kind of a sad story. You know, he was a puppet his whole life, and even when he was an adult, he wasn't allowed to have independent authority or even freedom of movement. So yeah, he was basically under house arrest, and one day they find him hanged in his room, presumably a suicide. Very sad. Anyway, next we have Theodosius I, famously the last man to rule over a unified Roman Empire. Theodosius I, also alternately known as Theodosius the Great, a very mixed legacy, I want to say, from Theodosius. He did win a very important victory against the Goths, and that required a great amount of diplomatic, political, military skill on his part. However, it was only a partial victory that didn't permanently solve the Gothic problem. He moved Rome in the direction of making Christianity the state religion. But he was, I think, trying to unify the empire under his sole rule. And in doing so, he fought several civil wars that you could say wasted the empire's resources at an important time. And also, in his last civil war, in his last battle, he inflamed the Gothic problem that he kicked the can down the road with, so to say, in the Gothic War. So in that battle, the Battle of the Frigidus, he brought a Gothic contingent led by a guy named Alaric. Maybe you've heard of him. He pretty much threw Alaric's Goths into the fray, and they got mauled. Theodosius won the battle, but at the cost of Gothic lives. So Alaric and the Goths were not very happy with the Romans and their imperial government for this. So this kind of grudge eventually blew up into a full-blown war, several wars between the Goths and the Romans, which eventually down the road led to the sacking of the city of Rome and a lot of the crises that fell upon the Western Empire during the 400s. And Theodosius sowed the seeds for that in a few ways. So yeah, I don't want to rank him higher than B tier, despite his many accomplishments for these reasons. Okay, next we have Magnus Maximus. Magnus Maximus is a usurper that Theodosius fights against in a series of civil wars. Magnus Maximus, I'm gonna give him a D tier because in order to launch his usurpation, he removed most of the Roman garrison of Britannia, which allowed foreign peoples to migrate and invade the island in the years following. So yeah, his removal of Roman troops from the island is pretty much what leads to the devolution of Roman authority there. Doesn't completely go away right away, but Magnus Maximus is where local kings and warlords start having a lot more power. And so it's actually interesting that Magnus Maximus ties into the early history of post-Roman Britain. For example, he is named in the genealogies of many of the Welsh kingdoms that arose in the post-Roman period. So he almost gains this status as one of the mythical founding fathers of Britain. But yeah, as far as his status as a Roman emperor is concerned, he compromised the security of the empire for personal aggrandizement, and in this case, it actually did have very detrimental effects on the empire's authority. So yeah, he has to go in D tier, probably like lower than this. Yeah, he has to go somewhere in D tier for this. Okay, now we are at the point where the Roman Empire splits permanently in two. So there's two imperial offices at this point. One is held by Honorius, the son of Theodosius. The other one is held by Arcadius, the other son of Theodosius. Honorius rules in the west, and yeah, he's getting an F tier because he was pretty much just a garbage political actor in every way. He was possibly involved in the killings of Gothic families in Italy, for example, which caused Gothic soldiers under Alaric to revolt and eventually sack Rome. His refusal to properly negotiate with Alaric during this whole crisis, or pay him, or do anything, led to this sacking. Honorius, generally not great. He pretty much presided over the dissolution of Roman imperial authority in a lot of Western Europe and did very little about it. Constantine III is fascinating to me. So yeah, this guy ties into our story that we were telling earlier about the devolution of Roman power in Britain. Magnus Maximus takes most of the Roman garrison off the island, but there are still some soldiers there because we know they were getting paid until the year 402 or so. But after that, they stopped getting paid, and so in 407, the remaining Roman soldiers on Britain, they decide to elevate a common soldier named Constantine to be their emperor. And then they cross the channel, they leave Britain behind, and they start fighting wars in Gaul against the enemies of Rome, the German tribes who have crossed the Rhine. So Constantine is a very interesting case. He's an emperor who leads, who basically spearheads Rome abandoning one of its provinces, but then he proceeds to fight Rome's enemies and defend the empire's borders. So yeah, I think for being a successful usurper, as well as being a defender of the empire, I'll put him in C tier. He can be in C tier, I guess. Constantius III, irrelevant, reigns for like 7 months, whatever. Now we have this guy, Valentinian III. I might just put him like the lowest possible spot here, because yeah, he was not good. He was never very politically active. Most emperors of this time weren't, but his most significant political act was murdering his best general, Aetius, who had been fighting against usurpers and the empire's enemies for decades. Immediately after he did this, he was killed, and the Vandals sacked Rome. So yeah, awful emperor in like every way. And here at the end, we have a couple of irrelevant emperors, and then we get to Majorian. So Majorian is, I would say, the last gasp of Roman imperial authority in the West. He leads the last major campaigns to reconquer the former Western imperial territories. And he actually has like a surprising amount of success doing this, given how broke the imperial government is at this point. So yeah, for fighting for a pretty much lost cause and doing it very successfully, I'll give him a B tier. I'll put him somewhere there. And then we have the rest of these guys who are just puppets, mostly irrelevant, didn't do very much. And the last guy, Romulus Augustulus, will round off the list. So yeah, here's my tier list. I tried to do this in a balanced and somewhat objective way. You can decide whether I succeeded there. The last video got a lot of engagement, good and bad. So I welcome that. I welcome feedback. I welcome your opinions. I'm excited to read what you guys have to say. And I appreciate anything that you guys want to tell me. So, yeah, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to leave a like and comment your thoughts.